Naruto does not take place in ancient Japan. Sorry to anyone who thought that Naruto's dodging samurai while also mailing scrolls by pigeon, and that this means that the story was set in the 1413 1200s. The series looks old school on purpose, for reasons a lot of fans don't realize. But if you pay attention, it's basically living in a slightly cursed, more country version of the 1990s. Yes, that means that Naruto Uzumaki was born around the same time that, if you're a older millennial, some of your favorite VHS tapes were still getting rewound manually. And once that clicks, Boruto's sudden technology jump stops looking like bad writing and starts looking more like a very intentional glow up. Join me in today's newest Naruto Explained video, where we go over some information that should change how you view the Naruto world, including the primary sources like Masashi Kishimoto's own words regarding when Naruto takes place, and even the sections of Japan that inspired the setting of many parts of the Naruto world that you know and love today. So the biggest myth about the Naruto timeline is that Naruto is set in ancient Japan. That's not true. The idea mostly comes from the aesthetics. You got the mix of traditional clothing, you got some ninja elements sprinkled in, you got the feudal system, you got villages, you got a lack of visible modern transportation infrastructure like highways and trains. It feels ancient, so people assume it, despite the fact that we see clothing on characters that directly reflects the 1990s. But the series itself, and more importantly, its own creator, tells us otherwise. In an interview from the official Naruto art book, which is called The Art of Naruto Uzumaki, Masashi Kishimoto is directly asked what time period Naruto takes place in. What was his answer? He says, quote, "I suppose that the times are not so different from that of today, maybe a little before the present day." Now, end quote. I want you to remember this. Naruto started publication in 1999. That's likely before some of you guys watching this video were even born. A little before present day does not mean feudal Japan. It means something closer to the mid-90s, depending on how you interpret a little before present day. That single statement flips the entire conversation on its head. If the story begins in the mid-1990s, then Naruto himself isn't some ancient relic. He's basically an 80s baby. He's a millennial, basically. Naruto is 12 at the start of the series, which would place his birth somewhere in the late 1980s. That lines up perfectly with the technology and the cultural cues that we see all throughout part 1 in the manga. So instead of imagining Naruto growing up alongside whatever ancient Japanese thing that you're thinking about, a more accurate mental image is basically Naruto is growing up in a part of the world that's technologically a step or two behind the major cities, but also still very modern to a degree. That distinction is everything, because the world is based on real Japan, but it is blended. So you might be confused. You might be going, wait a second, what are you talking about? So the Naruto world is not random. It is heavily inspired by real locations in Japan. Masashi Kishimoto has spoken more than once about how his hometown, the Okayama Prefecture, influenced the design of the world itself. He grew up in the more rural part of that area, and that shows in how Konoha feels. You can actually see the direct inspiration from various places, like the traditional Kyoto-style architecture, the old Japanese castle towns that are sprinkled into the land of fire, like say when Tsunade met Orochimaru in Kabuto. In particular, if you look at Korakuen Garden, you see a lot of inspiration in Naruto there. That's why Naruto feels old. It's not ancient. It's rural. It's traditional. And that's a huge difference. Even in real life, rural areas lag behind cities in terms of technology and modernization. The gap, it is more noticeable in the 1990s. Using a blended inspiration for the 1990s quite a bit explains a lot when you look at that. But it's very important to note, because say some of you guys watching this might be going, well, wait a second, I live out in the country. Like, I don't see how we're that far behind. So I would say this: rural 1990s is not the same as rural 2020s. back in the rural 1990s, you might have had some towns that they didn't even have a traffic light. There was a stop sign, and that was it. The closest convenience store might have been 30, 40 miles away. Just like how in some parts of, say, the United States now, in some of the rural areas, you don't even have fiber optic internet. But here's the other thing to look at. The technology, it was always there in Naruto. It's always had modern elements. Konoha was always a blend of what you see in a rural area as well as a bigger city, because Kishimoto took blended aspects of different parts of Japan to mold them into what you see in Konoha and the Land of Fire. So look at the technology. We had computers on desk. Iruka literally had one. You had wireless radios that were used in missions. You had VHS tapes. You had old school CRT televisions, like say in Sasuke's room. You had movie theaters and neon billboards in the manga. That's not ancient technology. That's just textbook 1990s. It might feel like ancient technology if you're a 2000s or a 2010s baby. Basically, if you are somebody that is Gen Z or you're Gen Alpha, it feels ancient to you. But to a millennial, it feels like all that was at home, because that was something that you saw in your childhood. That VHS detail is very important. While VHS did start in the 1970s, it didn't become widespread and super affordable enough for everyday use, including in rural areas, until the 1990s, where it became very widespread. For comparison, in current dollars, the roughly $1,000 that was spent on VHS in the 70s would be roughly $4,500 now. To tell you how expensive that was. That is why it took so long for VHS players to be affordable enough to be in everyday homes. That lines up perfectly with Kishimoto's statement, and the fact that you saw VHS players in more than one home in the manga, or you saw them outside of military environments, that is why. The technology's not inconsistent. It's in there, it's subtle. If you don't pay attention, you will miss it, but it is very consistent with the time period. So if the technology is modern, why does Naruto feel so ancient? Well, it's because Kishimoto made a deliberate stylistic choice. He prioritized culture over a complete modernization, but he also didn't fully abandon it either. That includes why you have the feudal political systems, where you have a Hokage and you have a feudal lord, because it's basically asking the question, how would the world operate if ninjas existed in the modern era? That is why you have a clan-based identity structure. That is why you have some characters with traditional clothing mixed in with modern elements. A lack of things that Masashi Kishimoto didn't personally like drawing, like trains and transportation, cars and planes. That is why you did not see them in the manga. But if you include the movies, what do you see? You see a train in the first Naruto movie. In Naruto Shippuden, in one of the movies, you see airplanes. That's all stuff that Studio Pierrot decided to do, but Kishimoto hated the idea of it. And here's also a really fun real-world parallel that you could look at. Japan still has an emperor to this day, even with a modern government that is led by a prime minister. One has a role that is basically ceremonial, and the other has a role that is more directly power-based. So the mix of old and new in Naruto is not unrealistic, it's just exaggerated to a degree for storytelling purposes. This makes even more sense when you consider the fact that who was Kishimoto's mentor? Akira Toriyama. He did the same thing with Dragon Ball. If there's one thing that completely exposes Naruto's timeline, it's also the fashion. Naruto's iconic outfit when he was a kid, that baggy two-tone orange and black jumpsuit, it screams early to mid 1990s streetwear. That loud, oversized, unapologetically chaotic outfit, that was what was trending at the time. Then when you look at Ino Yamanaka, her design is heavily inspired by Gairu fashion, and that exploded in Japan in the late 90s and the early 2000s. The blonde hair, albeit she is naturally blonde, the bold attitude, the trend forward type of outfits, her Naruto Shippuden design, it pushes her design even closer towards that 90s and early 2000s aesthetic. The fashion doesn't lie. And Naruto's fashion was basically screaming, welcome to the 90s, but with ninjas. And then you saw it updated a bit when you got into the 3-year time skip. So Boruto's technology jump makes perfect sense, but let's address why it broke everyone's brain. Why does Boruto Naruto Next Generation as a manga look so much much more modern? It's because it should. That's roughly a 15 to 20 year gap between the start of Naruto and Boruto's era, depending on what you want to use, whether it be the end of Naruto's manga to the start of Boruto, or if you want to go to the start of Naruto's manga to the start of Boruto. In real life, the jump from the mid to late 90s to the back end of the mid 2010s, it is absolutely insane technology-wise, which again, if you're a 2000s baby, it's hard to imagine a world without, say, YouTube or a smartphone, but technology literally advanced that fast in roughly a generation. Think about it. We went from VHS tapes to DVDs to Blu-ray to now you have streaming. We went from CRT TVs to flat screens to tablets and cell phones being used as televisions. We went from no internet to limited internet in certain areas to smartphones everywhere. You're likely watching this video on a handheld supercomputer. And I say no internet when I'm referring to the rural areas. It was very hard to have internet in some of those backwater areas. We went from basic computers to laptops and tablets. We went from card catalogs at a library to literally you have a computer filing system, and some libraries have tablets that you can just look up the books, and that's just assuming that you just don't order the book to read it digitally on your phone. That's exactly what we see in Boruto. Handheld gaming devices are abundant, flat screen televisions, advanced scientific ninja tools, trains, and modern infrastructure. Even the technology jump, it was explained and explored. Sasuke and Naruto Gaiden was stated to be too analog by Naruto himself because he still communicated by messenger bird. In Garahiden, a sandstorm mirage, which never got animated by the way, Shikamaru was hesitant to use things like email and even using phone lines to talk, even though later on with the latter, with the telephones, you did see telephones in part 1 of Naruto. In particular, you saw telephone lines, and in Naruto Gaiden, we see Kakashi talking over a telephone. In Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, we see Shikamaru talking over a telephone. It makes sense why these shinobi for a time did not like to use them, and it's because of information leaks, because the hidden villages at the end of the day are a military intelligence state, and at that point in time, there was not peace between the nations. They were in an open Cold War. That's why important documents, they were personally transported without a record or a potential leak or a traceable communication point. People like Sasuke, even 14 years after the war, still prefers birds for that reason. It's harder to intercept the birds and seal the messages with codes that can be destroyed if need be if it gets into the wrong hands. Even in the wars in the 20th century Japan, they would also use this method. That's a throwback to. The tech jump is not random. It mirrors real world technological evolution. What Kishimoto did was very clever. He created a world that feels timeless, looks traditional, but operates on a modern timeline while also not abandoning some of the ancient roots. This allows Naruto to feel very mythological without being locked into a historical time period. Then when Mikio Ikimoto takes over, he leans harder into the modern aesthetics, especially the fashion. If you're familiar with Ikimoto's past works, even his illustrations that he would draw on the covers and the jacket inserts for the Naruto manga, like say the first illustration he ever did for adult Naruto Uzumaki on Naruto chapter should be 693. He was notorious for using modern designs. The time jump of almost 20 years was basically a tabula rasa that Ikimoto got to explore, because from the start of Naruto to Boruto, you got roughly 20 years between his fashion influence and the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure influence. That's why you see more of the Y2K inspired outfits, which I'll follow up on in a second. That's why you see more baggy jeans, layered streetwear, vintage Y2K inspired rework waist straps on certain characters like say Yodo, or you see characters with low cut jeans. You see more experimental designs that look like they advanced Naruto fashion 2 decades, because that's quite literally what it was, 2 decades. That also lines up perfectly with the real world resurgence of Y2K trends. Around COVID, so 2019, 2018, 2020, in that 3-year time span before COVID and during and after COVID, you saw a huge resurgence of certain Y2K era fashion. Naruto was never about ancient Japan. Get that out your head. It's always been a story set in modern-ish niche in terms of the world, and it was also one that blended tradition. Once you understand that, the technology makes sense, the fashion makes sense, Boruto's evolution makes sense, especially in Two Blue Vortex. It is 19 years since the end of the Fourth Great Ninja War. It is well over 20 years since the start of Naruto Chapter 1. Suddenly, the series, it stops feeling inconsistent. Instead, it feels intentionally layered because Naruto isn't stuck in the past. It's a world that chooses what parts of the past it's keeping while also quietly moving forward the entire time. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking on the left to check out more videos from Naruto Explained, or clicking on the right, check out videos from other two anime channels where I talk about non-Naruto anime and manga.